Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8 minutes before 8 is the time, and we'll come back to you and your reactions to the Queen's speech. Many of you saying there were warm words, but warm words don't butter the parsnips. They don't actually make the cost of living helpful in any way, do they? Let's bring in a senior member of the government, Michael Gove, of course, Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, and joins me now. Levelling Up, Mr. Gove, was very much the mantra that helped get you and your colleagues elected with such power and such numbers just a couple of years ago. What came about in the Queen's speech that will help you with your drive to level up? Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Nick. There are more than 20 bills which we hope will become law in the Queen's speech, and they will do everything from giving communities a greater say over new development, making sure that we protect people who are in council and social houses, to make sure that their rights are protected, making sure that people in the private rented sector don't face excessive rent increases, making sure that for people in the farming and food sector that we also have the technology required in order to power ahead of our rivals and to guarantee food security. And there are also measures in there which ensure that over the long term we can take advantage of some of the freedoms and flexibilities that being outside the European Union give us in order, for example, to be able to use the money that government spends on industry to support the small and medium-sized businesses that are the engine room of the economy.
But why has it taken 2 years? You could have done this with your colleagues 2 years ago, couldn't you?
Well, the whole point of having a 4 or 5 year parliamentary term is to take things in stages, and some of the steps that we've already taken in this Parliament have, for example, ensured that we can make the most of investment in the energy sector, that we can take steps to ensure that our great northern cities get some of the transport infrastructure and the investment in high streets that they need. So will levelling up occur instantly and overnight? No. Has the work already begun? Absolutely, but there is much more to do, and yesterday's Queen's speech shows the extent of our ambition, and that ambition will also be there in legislation which will hold us, the government, to account for delivering meaningful change both in the next couple of years and also by 2030.
Well, let me ask you, Mr. Gove, were you asked to give a grade for what the government has achieved in the last 2+ years? What would you give yourself? B-?
No, I think it's always a mistake to mark your own homework, but let me look at one particular thing. And
you and your colleagues, seriously, it's a B-. You mentioned joining our great northern cities. You'll know better than I that HS2, which I think has quadrupled its initial budget, we're not even going to get the leg from the great city of Manchester to the great city of Leeds. That's been junked. How is that levelling up?
Well, we're spending more overall on rail infrastructure than...
But that, if I'm right, that leg is not going to go ahead, is it? You've scrapped that.
We do have a major investment, not just in HS2, but in other rail infrastructure linking the north. But I was going to say, rather than me making a judgment, one of the biggest challenges we all know that this country's faced over the last 2 years was dealing with the COVID pandemic. And the reason I mention that is because recently we had the World Health Organization looking at how different countries had done. It's not a contest, it's not a race, but one of the things that study did bring out is that the UK overall, under Boris Johnson's leadership, had performed better than many, many other countries in handling the COVID pandemic. If you'd listened to a lot of the commentators during those 2 years, you certainly wouldn't have come to that conclusion. So I prefer objective judgments from outside, and when we faced a big crisis, as we've discussed in the past, the Prime Minister was under a huge amount of pressure, but he got those very big decisions right. Now that we're out of the pandemic, the big economic questions he's getting right as well.
Well, you say that. Now, there's a lot of people saying he's not done enough. I think I said earlier, warm words, but they don't butter the parsnips. You'll be aware that 1 in 20 homes now have outgoings that vastly exceed their income. People are getting closer and closer to what could be called struggle street, and nothing forthcoming. Do you think we need an emergency budget? Do we need to review the lift in corporation tax, or do we need to cut VAT? Mr. Gove?
No. I think that...
Why?
I don't think we need an emergency budget. I do think that we need to make sure that we have the right balance between paying down our deficit, keeping the confidence of international markets and keeping interest rates as low as possible, with also targeting help on the very poorest. And that's why...
so how is that to come about, sir? How is that help for those at the lowest end? If we don't have some kind of budget or some kind of announcement from your colleague, Mr. Sunak, how is that to be brought about?
Well, we've already done things like cutting council tax for the very poorest, helping with energy bills for everyone. We are also looking, the Prime Minister was convening a cabinet meeting last night, at other steps that we can take to help honestly, everyone.
Mr. Gove, scrapping MOTs is not exactly going to get it done, is it? Which was one of the initiatives. People are burning firewood in their houses to keep warm and spending all day driving around in the backseat of a bus, and you're convening meetings. We need action, Mr. Gove. Action this day. Carpe diem.
Yep. Well, to take another case in point, one of the things that my department has done, where we have taken action to help people who were in really tough circumstances, were those people who were leaseholders who were trapped in flats that were unsafe and action needed to be taken. We made sure that the builders paid those bills rather than the individual citizens in each flat. That was action already taken to shift money from those who had it to those who needed it. And again, we are similarly reviewing exactly how we can help more people onto the property ladder overall. The work of government never ends. In that sense, it's absolutely vital that every government department is focusing, as I mentioned earlier, on everything that can be done. And, there will be some things which are small, but which do make a difference, and then other policy initiatives which do move the dial profoundly. But when we are talking about saving money, everything that helps people on tight budgets, I welcome. And I'm not saying that each individual initiative in itself is transformative, but they are all designed by ministers working night and day to help those who are feeling the pinch.
Let me ask you, you mentioned the safety of people's dwellings. Am I right in saying that leaseholders in buildings affected with the so-called cladding scandal under 11 metres are still having to pick up the cost of repairs? Is that correct?
We are making sure that wherever possible, it is the ultimate owner of the property.
I'll take that as a yes. I'm going to take that as as an affirmative. So another one. If so, how fair is that, Secretary of State, that 11 metres and below, I've got to pay to have the cladding removed when it passed government regs? How come?
Well, in each individual case, there are different rules that apply to buildings over a particular height and under a particular height.
I've got that, sir. I've got that. But 11 metres and below, I'm living in a flat. Cladding that was applied at the time, authorised by government regulations, I now have to pay to have it removed. Mr. Gove, you're a decent bloke. How fair is that?
Not quite. I think that you have to look at each individual building. So one of the things I would say is that, firstly, we've got money from the builders in order to make sure that cladding can be removed. Secondly, it will be the ultimate owner of the building who will bear that responsibility. Thirdly, there is government cash available to support. And fourthly, there is a cap, an absolute cap on what any leaseholder will ever have to pay, and that will take into account costs that have already been incurred. So we've spread the burden across those builders and property owners who have the broadest shoulders, and relieved leaseholders in all save a limited number of circumstances of having to pay.
All right. I've only got a last minute or so with you. The London Chamber of Commerce has said it was disappointed there was nothing in the Queen's speech to address the cost of living crisis, particularly in London, where they say around 2.5 million people, London and the South East, live in poverty. What would you say to the London Chamber of Commerce's claims?
Again, I think the London Chamber of Commerce is right to highlight the fact that even as we are seeking to ensure that we do much more for the North, the Midlands and the South West, that we also need to take account of the fact that there are people in our great capital city who do need support. And we've given money to local authorities through the Household Support Fund to ensure that whether it's Harrow or Kensington and Chelsea or Hillingdon, that good local authorities have the money that they need in order to help those who are in extremis. And this is a discretionary fund that local councillors can use to help local people.
Do you tweet, Mr. Gove?
From time to time, yes.
Do you think Twitter has a left-wing bias?
I don't know.
You must have a view. Elon Musk thinks it does. What does Michael Gove think?
I think Elon Musk is far, far richer than me, so he's obviously smarter, so I better not disagree with him.
All right, I don't know if rich people are necessarily that smart. Lastly, the Polish Prime Minister says that Putin is a modern-day Hitler or Stalin. Is he correct?
I think that Vladimir Putin is responsible for some of the most horrific criminal activity of my lifetime, and we must do everything we can to help Ukraine and to ensure that justice is done in the end.
Right, but is he a modern-day Hitler or Stalin?
I think that there are all sorts of comparisons that can be drawn and that others have drawn. Again, I'm not a history expert. I'm not a particularly learned commentator.
Adroit across, yeah.
So I think I can see the evil for which he directly is responsible. But drawing historical comparisons, there are smarter people than me who are better at doing that.
Well, I tell you what you are, according to Politico. I'm sorry to keep you one extra 30 seconds. I tell you what you are, Mr. Gove. You are apparently furious at suggestions that Liz Truss wants to tear up the Northern Ireland Protocol, reports Politico. On a sort of scale of 1 to 10, how angry are you about this, Mr. Gove?
-5. I'm super cool with it. And I'm a big Liz Truss fan.
Super cool, Michael Gove. Thank you for your time. A pound behind Elon Musk, I reckon. 4 minutes after 8, LBC News.
Thank you, Mr. Gove. As always, sorry to detain you.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, researchers say 1.5 million UK households will struggle to pay for food and energy over the next year. A report from an influential think tank has warned their income will